I'm Eric Chemi, and this is Politely Pushy. Welcome to Politely Pushy. I'm your host, as always, Eric Chemi. Today, I'm really excited. We've got Jacob Robbins here. He covers AI, VC, a lot of startup action from PitchBook in Seattle. You're in your office. It's rare to actually see somebody in an office these days. Jacob, thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Eric, it's such an honor and a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm just delighted.
You know, AI, not much going on there these days, right? I'm sure you've had a lot of free time on your hands.
You know, sometimes I wish that were the case. No, there's a lot of great stuff that's happening, and I think there's a perception that because there's so much going on, that it would be easy to write about. But in a lot of different ways, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, it's actually really hard to write about because you want to find angles and areas that nobody else is talking about, and you want to get a beat on things that are fascinating and different from what's going on. One of my colleagues has taken to calling me Captain Wetblanket, because I often will talk about maybe some of the more challenging things that's going on in the AI industry and the VC landscape. But no, when I started my first week and a half at PitchBook, just to give you and your viewers some perspective, that first week and a half was the week that not only FTX collapsed, but like a week later is when ChatGPT was released to the general public. So I really lucked out coming in at just the right time.
What was that first week like? Did you sleep at all? Because now you've got a new job. You want to impress the new bosses. You want to bring the readership with you. Let's say they're following you on other platforms. Hey, I'm over here now. You don't want to screw up. There's so much news. What was the stress level that first week?
Well, it was super stressful because when I started, they had me go through a lot of these different trainings. Because PitchBook, for viewers that don't know, it's a data company that has VC and private equity deal data and things like that. And I work in the news division of this really big data company. And so a lot of the training is how do you use the PitchBook platform and yada, yada. Like in my previous position, I had used PitchBook before. So I knew exactly how to do it and everything. But what was stressful was I would be in these trainings and things would be happening. And I'd be like, oh man, I kind of want to get back to my desk so I can write about this stuff. I can report on this. And
I don't have time for training. Classic.
Yeah.
I don't have time for your corporate training. I have stories to break.
It was kind of like walking that line a little bit, certainly. But the coverage that we've done on AI, I think, has been really unique. And we've captured a lot of voices, and we've gone to where a lot of people are at. And what I mean by that is you can write about these trends, you can write about things that are going on, and it all seems really exciting. But if you're not talking to people every day about what they're feeling and what they're seeing, then it just kind of becomes a lot of like conjecture or just reporting on what you're seeing. And this moment that we're living in, it's really exciting. There's a lot of great action. There's also a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of second guessing, and there's a lot of, questioning. And those are the areas that I think are really interesting. Like, how are people really grappling with, are we going too far? Is this all moving too fast? And how are people trying to protect themselves, or how are startups trying to survive? Those are the kinds of things that I think are really interesting that I've been really fortunate to really be on the front line doing that stuff.
So what's your background? Because anyone can go to your LinkedIn. They see, okay, went to American University on the East Coast, double major political science and literature. It's not like you've got a tech degree per se, but clearly you've done enough around it. You know enough about it. But what has that transition been like from a political science degree to now what you're doing, which is clearly more tech, although there's a lot of politics involved going on, certainly. But walk us through how you got from A to B.
Well, my literature degree it's a concentration in cinema studies, because I thought for a long time I wanted to do filmmaking.
Okay.
And I had worked in the film industry as a production assistant in New York City. I had worked as an intern on a little film with Julianne Moore and Michelle Williams. And then halfway through shooting, I got offered a full-time job. And then I thought, oh, maybe I'll stick around and do this. And then I decided, no, I should probably go and finish college. And when I did that, well, if I hadn't done that, I would never have met my wife. I would never have met my best friends in the whole world. But when I thought I was going to do filmmaking, I always loved writing. And I loved just telling unique, different, kind of weird stories about people doing things on the fringe. And when the pandemic happened, like many people, I had to reassess sort of what my plan was and what was going on. I was still in college. I was actually studying abroad when the pandemic happened, and I had to come back from being in Scotland. And I did what a lot of journalists, I think, have done when they have thought about getting their start. I went to work at my local newspaper, and that was a great experience. I think people who go straight from their schooling experience to working at a national outlet, I think that's a really valid path. But if you don't get that experience of working in a local paper, I think you're really missing out, because I think we forget that journalism is really, it's a service. It's a service to communities, both big and small. And so I worked in my local paper for a little bit, and I was reporting on all kinds. And I grew up in rural Massachusetts in the Berkshires. And so the things I was reporting on were just little spats of road access and, oh, this restaurant wants to, that's also a home, dueling it out with this performance venue and things like that.
Those are the hot button things in those areas, right? Those are things that'll rile up thousands of people.
Hot button things, of course. I've reported on a lot of different local political issues. And just to take a step back, when I was growing up, I had participated in this youth mentoring program that this youth advocacy program organization in the Berkshires ran. And my mentor was this filmmaker, Bobby. And Bobby knew that I always really wanted to do something a little bit bigger. Not that public journalism, working at your local paper is not a big thing, but I wanted to do something that would have even more of an impact. And Bobby knew somebody who was working with Graydon Carter at the time at his new publication called Airmail. And he reached out to them for me, and he said, I think you should meet Jacob. And I met with them, and they said, well, why don't I introduce you to Graydon? And I, of course, Graydon Carter, the former editor of Vanity Fair, one of my great idols and probably one of the most important journalistic figures of the last 25 years. And when I met him, of course, I was really nervous, and for the viewers that are listening, I have a beard. I shaved my beard because very famously he does not like facial hair. And when I met him, we just gelled instantaneously. We met on Zoom, and he offered me a job like right on the spot to come and work for him. And it's like and he didn't really give me the chance to say no. Not that I would have said no, but it catapulted my life and career into a whole different stratosphere. And I got to meet people and work with people that were at the forefront of all kinds of exciting journalistic trends and things. I got to do things that were wild and crazy. I had to deal with things that were a little insane. And I worked my way up, and I was a writer, I was an editor, and that was more of an arts and entertainment focus. I've always loved politics, but I've also always really loved the intersection of politics and technology. And so I had the opportunity arise to go work at Business Insider for a little bit, where I worked on their cloud computing desk. I started doing work just writing about semiconductors and things like that. And then I ended up doing a lot of work covering the Broadcom VMware acquisition, really reporting on what was going on inside there and some of the pain points that employees were feeling. And then, like most organizations, news organizations, unfortunately, they went through a lot of restructuring, and I ended up not getting my contract renewed. And so I was really worried about what I was going to do. And I had moved to Seattle to be with my then girlfriend, now wife. And there was an opening for PitchBook in their news division. I had known PitchBook. I had used PitchBook. I applied, and like right away, I got a response, and I interviewed, and the rest is history. I want to say about my background, something that I think is really important is, a lot of people get extremely, extremely lucky. They either know the right person, or they just meet the right people and they're in the right place at the right time. And I think that there's something to be said about that, yeah. But at the end of the day, I think what my story shows and hopefully can help people is, I had somebody maybe help me get my foot in the door, but I'm the one who blew that door, open. I made those opportunities and things happen. And I'm lucky that I've had people in my life who have looked after me, who have invested in me, and have wanted to see me succeed.
You're right. Connections, networking, the right people can certainly help get you that step, but you've got to do the work, right? You've got to actually continue to keep that job, because as we know, those are not guaranteed to anybody. So here we are now, PitchBook, and you give a good perspective. Most people think of it rightly as, hey, it's a data company. Maybe they're not thinking about the news of it. So how does that affect the type of stories that you do, the way that the company operates? Look, when I worked at Bloomberg, same thing. Bloomberg makes its money from data, and I had used its data terminal in previous jobs. So I understand the same approach of how you're getting to there. So do you think it changes the kinds of stories that you do, given your experience in other newsrooms versus, hey, we're not primarily making most of our money on the news here?
That's a really good point. And this is something we've thought a lot about. And I wanted to say to all of your viewers, I want to dispel this notion. We're not just like an editorial, advertising arm. We're completely independent. We are really lucky that working at this company, we get access to all kinds of great data that really help drive our stories and really help provide a much clearer, fuller picture about the things that we're writing about. But we're completely independent. And what that means is we get to do the kinds of stories that we want to do, that we think our readers are going to find interesting. But what that means is that, because we're a smaller news outlet than, say, some of the other ones I've worked at, like a Business Insider, is the kinds of stories we're doing are maybe not necessarily the ones that are reporting on the most breaking news, but we call the kinds of stories that we do like really strong second day stories. So what does that mean? It means that some news has come out, maybe, like, for example, when Microsoft invested $10 billion into OpenAI, and everybody was reporting on that, and rightfully so. It's a really big deal. But what we were able to do is we came in, maybe the next day and said, well, this is a really big deal, and here is the deal put in this VC context of, this is the largest VC deal that we've recorded on our platform, and this is where it is plotted out. This is what you can see how it relates to others, and it provides people that kind of perspective. The way that I think about my job and the way that my colleagues think about what we're doing here is we want to provide all of the most important information that investors need to know about. And in this world that we operate in, there is so much noise all the time. Look at what happened on Monday with the sell-offs and things like that. I read about the private market still has, an impact and things like that. Things happen really quickly. People want context, and people want to understand what's going on and what this all means in a kind of holistic view. And that's what we're really doing, is we're providing all of that information and putting it in a succinct, really concise way, so that investors can understand, but people on the outside who are really curious, who want to do more of their research, do more due diligence, so that they can also understand the trends that are going on too.
I'm looking at your stories, and just, recently you've hit a lot of different sectors, right? It's grid infrastructure, it's, legal technologies, insurance technologies, food, supply chain, cybersecurity, restaurants, gaming. How do you focus, or how does someone who says, hey, I really want to work with Jacob on a story, or I want to follow him because he's got a particular beat, how are you organizing your thoughts, and how does a story get to you and then get to the finish line?
Well, sometimes what will happen is we'll have a new batch of data come in, and we'll decide we should really do something that's going to highlight that, or we'll have a report coming out and we'll say, there's this really little interesting tidbit in this report, and so why don't we highlight some of the things that are going on? And that's one of the great things about working in the editorial department of this company, is that you get to touch all of these different areas, right? But the way that stories often find themselves for me is, I'll think about a lot of times I'll go after the story. And I'll reach out to people who have reached out to me before, trying to look for people to talk to. But a lot of times I'll really start with, what does the data say? And with the case of legal tech, or some of the stories that I've done about AI valuations, or some of the stuff that's gone on with media generation and things like that, a lot of that starts with, what does the data say? Is there something interesting here? Or if there's not something interesting here, but we're seeing a lot of buzz about it by people, why do they think differently about that? So I'll start off with data, but a lot of times, and I don't want to sound so cynical, but where I'll start is, if I'm seeing something in the news, I'll think, well, what's the other side of this? Is there actually something lucrative going on here? Is there, as an investor, is there something going on? Does this make sense? Is this just hype? And reporting on crypto for a little bit, that really helped train me, right? When I was reporting on crypto, a lot of it was, a hype and things like that. And what you learn that it's good. It's exciting to be in the middle of something, but you also have to ask questions, and you have to be skeptical of the things that are going on. And that skepticism has really helped me find some of these other stories. Or conversely, you have to be really curious. So there's all these things that are going on. And I've written about AI orchestration, and that's not something that that was getting a lot of buzz at the time. And that came from just trying to find what are areas that people are not reporting on, that are raising money, but is not being publicized in things like TechCrunch or things like that, and that's where I find a lot of my interest, is really kind of, I don't want to say the fringe, because it is still mainstream, but finding things that are kind of just right bubbling under that surface.
I like that. I feel like when I was reporting, that's where I tried to be, right? A little bit on the fringe, the day two kind of stuff. Hey, this is out there. It's important. It's a big trend, but no one's talking about it. But I found that when you did stories like that, you didn't get as much clicks. You didn't get as much numbers, readership, because people tend to flock to that big day one headline, or the big thing everyone's talking about. How do you balance that curiosity and interest versus, but we got to make some money here?
Well, that's something that every news outlet has to balance. I'm really fortunate that most of my stories, I would say, get a lot of traction, get a lot of clicks, and get a lot of viewers. But the ones that don't, what you do is you learn from them, and you as a journalist, as important as it is to pursue the things that you find interesting, you have to be also informed by what your readers are telling you, and whether or not that's looking at the various tools that you have to see what stories are doing well, or by going to the people that you're talking to, the investors that are going to read your stuff, and asking them, like, what do you find interesting? What's going on? It sounds kind of weird, but you kind of always have to be doing some market research in a way, right? Like it helps you understand what's going on, but it helps you also find the stories that people are going to find really interesting. And the second day stuff, in this area that I focus on with the private markets, because there is a lot of buzz, but it can also be quite, opaque and vague. What we're able to do is provide that clarity, and that gets a lot of, and just by doing that, that helps generate a lot of traction and excitement.
You mentioned the word hype. What do you feel like right now is overhyped media-wise, and then vice versa, underhyped, something you think is not getting as much press as it should be?
Well, the thing I think that is absolutely extremely underhyped, maybe hype isn't the right word, but that's not getting a lot of coverage that I would love to see more of, is AI is going to accomplish a lot, and it's going to be incredibly transformative. It is also incredibly bad for the environment. And that is not a biased statement. That is just a matter of fact.
You mean just all the electricity usage, the data center power consumption stuff? Yeah.
It consumes a lot of power. And there has been some reporting on this, but it's kind of getting lost in the fray because there's so much excitement about what's going on. And I would love to see and report on some more startups that are trying to tackle this issue. I mean, you see a little bit, there's a move with some of these, semiconductors, on-prem models that can run locally, smaller models that are, like Mistral, that's doing like more bite-sized stuff. Like that is getting traction, but the environmental stuff, I think, is something that should be getting more attention, that we should be talking more about. I think what's incredibly overhyped, and this is not an original thought, many people have been saying this, but and this is not to say that I'm biased in any way, but the utility of what we're seeing right now with AI, there are a lot of things you can do with it, but a lot of the excitement, it seems, is about things that haven't materialized yet. People keep talking about AI agents and things like that. That's just not something that we're seeing a lot of at this point. There was a big push with AI hardware to incorporate AI agents into things, and that just really extremely fizzled out. And so I think that like anything in the VC private market space, like there in the startup space, there is a lot of excitement, but things often kind of get oversold. In the AI legal tech story that I wrote, that I encourage everybody to read, I think one of the really interesting takeaways that came out of that story was like the approach that investors and startups are taking in that area is like be more measured, and in some cases downplay the capabilities of what this stuff can do, and really embrace the fallibility, but also go to people and let them know, like, this is just a tool and it is not the ultimate tool. And I think there's this thinking now that, oh, well, this is like the ultimate tool. I will also just say this, and this is also not an original thought, but maybe something that doesn't get a lot of attention, is like we're seeing a lot of LLM companies and startups really come online and really vie for dominance and things like that. And there is so much hope and so much enthusiasm, but there are only so many needs that all of these different LLMs can meet, right? And you're seeing vast amounts of capital go into these huge companies, but like, there's not the explosion that we're seeing. What what will then sort of be left, I think people will be shocked because we probably won't see as many companies as we are now. But this is something that happens throughout time, right? With mobile, with the .com stuff.
You saw
But
it with the auto industry. There were hundreds of companies, or I mean, there's some huge number. I don't know if it's hundreds, but maybe 100. But you go back a century ago, there were way more car companies then than there are now. And you think about oil companies more then than now. So I think you're right. I think everyone's out there in the frontier, and then we will see the winners take all at some point.
As you know, as much as things change, right, where we recognize, oh, there were all these things that happened and maybe we need to rethink our approach, things also stay the same, right? Like it is incredible to me the amount of LLM companies that are out there. It's incredible the amount of image generation startups and things, especially when a lot of these big tech companies are getting involved in Gen AI, are doing this stuff. And it's getting a much broader, wider audience, So it's just fascinating to me that history, while it maybe doesn't always repeat itself, it does often rhyme, right? There's that famous saying. And it's interesting to be reporting on that and bringing that kind of perspective and seeing all these things play out.
You mentioned TechCrunch just briefly earlier. Is that your main competitor in your head? Who do you think of as your competitive space?
That's a good question. Well, I don't want to give like a measly answer. I don't like to think that anybody's our competitor. I like to think we're all in this, doing a good service and providing people the news. But I guess if I had to say, are there people that we compete with that let me phrase it to you this way, Eric.
And it could be friendly competition too. Like when I worked at Bloomberg CNBC, we had friends going back and forth from one company to the other, or the Wall Street Journal, or Reuters, and you had a certain competitive set, but they were oftentimes your friends too. So I ask it not from a cutthroat way, but from a media outlet, let's say correlation way. Like, what are the other outlets that might be correlated with your outlet as opposed to competing?
The journalists whose work I really admire, who I seek to emulate, who I think I view myself as hopefully being in the same class that I want to be working with and towards, right? The information has just incredible AI coverage. Their AI newsletter is like completely unmatched, in my opinion. And Kate Clark, who does some AI coverage, but mostly does a lot of other startup stuff. She got her start here at PitchBook's. So I don't know if she'll listen to this, but Kate, always good to see a fellow PitchBook alum doing good stuff. And TechCrunch too, to a certain extent. TechCrunch and Business Insider report more on kind of the bigger sort of like right away news. And while we do that sometimes, I think more we're in a class of it's like a hybrid competition between TechCrunch and the information, because the information will do those more in-depth trends reporting, but TechCrunch also will do a lot of the bigger breaking news stuff. And so we're kind of in the middle of that, trying to do the breaking news stuff and trying to also have the really well-rounded, well-researched reporting. But the information, they go so in depth and they're reporting on all kinds of scoops and things. And that's something that's just that's just great to see.
And then lastly, do you ever think about what you would be investing in? Because you're dealing with all these VC investors and the startups they put money in. Do you ever have a sense for, oh, I wish I could put money into this, or maybe you have put some money into something, or do you in the back of your head think, I think this is going to completely flop? I'm sure you've got a sense for, if I were in their shoes, here's what I would do instead.
Well, that's a really good question. This is a question I get asked a lot. And I think people are really surprised when I tell them I don't invest and I have no interest. I mean, I have a 401k, but I don't invest, like day trade or things like that. And I think one of the reasons why is because I'm so close to a lot of the things I report about. And even if we're just talking about public market investing, there's still the knock-on effects. I've written about NVIDIA. I write about, chips and things like that, So for me, I feel like I'm just way too close to that type of stuff where I'd be so concerned about things that people are telling me and all the different signals that, I would get so in my head and I wouldn't know, do I have a good position, this and that, and the other thing. But I guess like when I think about what I would invest in and what fascinates me and interests me, a lot of it, like I talked about with the power consumption, things like that, the energy companies, in particular, the renewable green energy stuff, that stuff I think is really interesting because like as the demand for AI continues to grow, like the power consumption needs are only going to keep growing. And so those companies are going to be really positioned to do well. But the big tech stuff and, all that jazz, like that's something that I think because of my proximity, I wouldn't want to do that. And I think also, I know that, some people, I don't know, like for me, I feel like maybe there's ethical concerns with that too. So I try not to think about it so much because I definitely know that by not investing, maybe I'm missing out, but I also feel like I would just be too close to it. Does that make sense? I don't know.
100% agree, right? It would be a little weird if it's, well, I've put my money in this and now here's a feature article about why it's such a great investment after I've already put money into it. So I think you're smart to avoid that kind of conflict of interest in terms of how you do it. But yeah, it's always good to have that perspective of when you're writing something, when you write certain stories, you think, wow, this would have been a great investment. I don't need to do it, but I believe in why they made that investment. And I'm sure you've written some where you just think, I'm writing this story, but I'm glad I'm not investing money in this because I just don't see a viable path here.
Well, and then sometimes I'll talk to people and they'll say to me, well, I invested in this company. There was a fella, I keep tuned, dear readers, because I have a great story coming out about the intersection of crypto and AI that I think is going to hopefully make some big waves. But there was a fella I talked to who invested in CoreWeave, which is this GPU cloud company, and he invested super early. And I was like, wow, you must have just felt so like you hit the jackpot. He's like, yeah, you have like no idea. So like there are people you talk to and you're like, wow, you really made it lucky. And there's some people you got to be a little careful because based on some of the things that they've talked about, you're like, ooh, probably not a good bet. And little touchy subjects.
Don't bring up that one the next time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Awesome. Jacob, this is so great. I appreciate the time. I'm sure in this half hour you've been with me, some story is breaking somewhere in the AI world, right, that you got to go chase down. This is great. Thank you so much. Obviously, everyone can follow your work on PitchBook. You're on Twitter. You're on LinkedIn. Jacob Robbins, this is fantastic. Thank you so much again.
Eric, if I can just say as a closing note,
of course,
two things. The first thing I want to say is, like most journalists, I just want to keep saying how excited and just thrilled I am that Evan Gerskovich is home. I think we have to keep saying that. And the other American captives, are home. And I just wanted to once again say that's a win for our free press and things like that. I also just want to remind people, just be kind to one another. Be kind and always try to help people. I am really fortunate that people have that I've been the person that people have thought about when they've said, I want to help somebody. And I'm really fortunate now that when people come to me and ask for help, I want to do that, whether or not it's a PR person on the outside asking, for help with the story and they can help me and I can help them, or aspiring journalists or whatever. Just help each other out because you never know what someone's going through. You don't know what kind of baggage they have and the things that they're grappling with. And if we can all be a little bit kinder, I think that creates a much better journalistic press, but it also creates a better environment, period. So I just want to leave on that note, be kind and think about others.
That's amazing. No arguments there. That's great. Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.